Our work isn't easy.
The American Family Association.
On this fundamental issue, I will not yield, and Planned Parenthood will not yield.
All the odds against us. Faithfulness is the word.
My religion compels me, and I love it for it, to be against discrimination of any kind in our country.
Our rights come from nature and God, not from government.
All God asks of you is faithfulness, faithfulness, faithfulness.
Fighting for the family, standing for the church, laboring to return to a moral and biblically based culture.
This is the American Family Association at AFA Today.
And live from New York, there's a shot of Midtown, and we are just experiencing an interesting election day in New York City. Charlie Rangel up against it in a primary race that may not turn out very good for him. We will see the very, very, very super, far too long-term congressman from New York in a primary fight for his life against a guy that is marginally better than him on a couple of things. I think the biggest benefit he brings to the table is that he's just not Charlie Rangel. When you're dealing with kind of institutionalized corruption, it is good to get fresh blood in there, even if there's nothing else that you can do besides that, philosophically or sociologically. So we will see what happens, but the voting is underway. And of all the things that, we've got just a ton of things in the news. We got, of course, the IRS hearings. We're going to get to that in a second. But we got John Kerry in Iraq. And John Kerry, who likes to say his name and speak very up and down in the tone of his voice, because that's what you do when you're John Kerry. He is there today, still probably making things worse the way John Kerry does. Have you ever noticed this? Since he's come on board as the Secretary of State, the president has sent him out on I don't know how many missions. Every one of them seems to get worse when he's John Kerry. And so he went out there yesterday. He went to Iraq yesterday, met with Maliki, sat down with Maliki, shook hands with Maliki. The terrorists laughed and took more territory. And by the way, the message of what he is sending when he gets out there is that Maliki still needs to, play nicer. Come to the table and play nice. Play more politely, please. Thank you to those of you, by the way, that wrote and reminded me yesterday that I was wrong on Saddam Hussein. I got 3 emails. It's funny. I talk to 1 million+ listeners a day, television, radio, all the broadcasts that we do, the newscasts that I do, et cetera, et cetera. I had 3 people correct me on what I got wrong yesterday. Saddam Hussein was, in fact, a Sunni from Tikrit. That makes sense as to why the Sunnis were chopping off the head of the judge that sentenced him to lose his. So what else do we got? Well, we got more scandals at the VA. Oh, Senator Cruz stepped up yesterday. This is kind of a big deal. He said, okay, no more funding. He's filing legislation that blocks any further releases of Gitmo prisoners unless the administration first explains the May exchange of 5 Taliban operatives for Sergeant Bergdahl. So the legislation he's actually proposed would require an explanation from the president to the Senate or to the House before he could allow any more to be gone. This will be an interesting ploy. Not that I know of if the president has any more plans to let any of them go. And we certainly let 5 of the worst ones go, so I don't know if it's going to save us from any future harm. But at the end of the day, I like the fact that Senator Cruz is stepping up and at least slapping some handcuffs on him, saying, hey, you can't do this anymore. I think that's a good thing. My phone number is 888-589-8840, 888-589-8840. Kevin McCullough, so glad to have you with us. Anyway, I started to tell you there's so much of that news going on, and it's everywhere you look. There's stuff. The economy's in a shambles. There's new polls that show the Democrats are just in a heap of a political electoral trouble. I didn't tell you about this. I was at the Talkers conference on Friday, and I was on the what's called the Radio Rumble panel. First of all, for those of you that don't know what Talkers is it's kind of the loose connection of network that all talk show talent in America are kind of through what we do for a living. We're kind of a part of, and they kind of what Talkers does is they report on things that go on in talk radio to basically other talk radio. They don't really. It's not really something that the massive world watches, but the inside industry of talk radio watches what's going on to one another, and Talkers is kind of the funnel by which most of that gets played out. Okay, so they had they have their twice a year they have a convention, once on the West Coast, once on the East Coast, and the East Coast one was held on Friday, and I was honored to be able to participate in it. Sean Hannity did the opening session. Phil Boyce, who's a programming kind of Jedi, was on some of the stuff in the middle of the day. I was on what's called the Radio Rumble panel. And Radio Rumble is where the management of Talkers takes the talent that are there and kind of divides them up, left, right, and then they put them on a panel together, and then they roll topics out, and they hope that it turns into an all-out, verbal brawl in the midst of this. And it's actually a ton of fun. It's the most exciting thing to watch when you're at Talkers, no doubt. And I've been going to Talkers for 10 years. So here's who's on the panel. A name you may not know, Tom Hartman, who's probably the most progressive leftist in talk radio that there is. I mean, he hosts a television on Russian television, and he espouses the good that the Soviet Union. I don't know if he actually does that, but anyway, that's Tom Hartman. He's about as far left as, and he's been good to me. When my first book came out, he actually had me on. Obviously, he was trying to poke holes in my book, but it was such a good segment that after 20 minutes, he asked me to stay longer. We did another 20-minute segment, took calls with callers and so forth, back and forth. So anyway, I have an affection for Tom, even though he's wrong about everything. Then sitting directly next to me was Alan Colmes, who used to be on the Hannity and Colmes TV show on Fox, and now he does just his show, just the Alan Colmes radio show, and he makes appearances on Fox all over the place, but he doesn't host the show anymore. So he was sitting next to me. Then it was myself. Then a couple of other talent, and the conservative happy warrior Mike Gallagher was also on the panel. So there was this one guy named Bubba the Love Sponge, I think does a shock show out of Florida or somewhere. But anyway, it was kind of interesting. And so the left were on the left and the right were on the right. And Michael Harrison, who's kind of the godfather of talk radio. He's kind of like, you go before Mr. Harrison, will you bless my talk show, please? And if he says, no, I'm kidding. He's a great guy. He's an advocate for the First Amendment, really, really big supporter of talk radio, just a fan of talk radio across the board. So he was asking the questions for the Radio Rumble. And the Rumble was kind of boring. Kind of got started on a light foot, didn't really have any speed to it. I'm sorry, it wasn't. Harrison introduced it. The former talk show host Lionel opened it, but he asked people like, "What's the 5 most important topics to the people that you talk to every day?" And everybody else was like, this Benghazi and the economy, Obamacare, and whatever. And I said, when it came to me, I was like, "Hey, how about the treachery of the presidency? Yeah, releasing terrorists." And that kind of got the conversation going. Alan Colmes said something, and he was sitting right next to me. And it was funny because during the breaks, he's like, "Hey, how's Stephen Baldwin doing?" Because he knows Stephen, and he's kind of he's fascinated by Stephen's coming to faith because he knows his other brothers as well. And so at this one point, in about halfway through the Rumble, the moderator turns to us. He goes, "Who do you think is going to be president in 2016? And I said, and he started with me. He's like, "McCullough, we'll start with you." And I had to think for a second. I said, I don't have a good feel. In 2006, I predicted that President Obama would become president in 2008. And I wasn't supportive of it, but I saw all all the mappings of what was going to take place, and I kind of predicted it all in advance, I don't have a real clear sense of what that's going to be. But I said, here's how I think it's going to kind of play out. I said, I think Hillary's going to be the nominee for the Democrats. And I said, on the Republican side, I said, you got a lot of young guns. You've got, Marco Rubio's and Rand Paul's and Ted Cruz's and all these guys that are really, that have a lot of potential and have a lot of savvy when it comes to what they do. But I said, I really am sensing that there's a need for not a young president this go-around. I'm sensing that we're kind of tired of our boy presidents. Clinton, Bush, Obama, all very young men when they got the presidency. And I sense that there's a little bit of an angst for somebody who's lived a little bit of life and may be thinking about, how I can bring that perspective to the stuff that I have at the table. So I said I wouldn't be surprised if Mike Huckabee got the nomination for the Republicans, to which half the room goes, "Oh, Mike Huckabee." And so then the moderator turns to Alan Colmes. Now, friends, remember who he's asking this question of. He's asking this question to Alan Colmes. And Alan immediately goes, with his little nerdy glasses, he goes, "Well, I have no idea who the Republicans are going to put forward." He said, "But I can tell you one thing. Hillary will not run for president." You could have heard a pin drop in the room, because the most well-known liberal talk show host in the room just said Hillary wasn't going to run. It was seriously like E.F. Hutton speaking or something. Like like what? And so the moderator was so surprised. Well, what do you mean by that? Well, if she's having as much and this was Alan's rationale. If she's having as much trouble answering simple questions on her book tour, imagine what kind of stuff she's going to get in the election cycle. And his consensus, his final answer was, "I don't know who the Democratic nominee is going to be." To which he then turns to Tom Hartman, the really far left progressive that's on the stage, and Tom, what do you think? And his mouth's still hanging open, and he's like, "I guess Hillary Clinton." And then we moved on to the next question. But I thought that was don't you think that's interesting? 888-589-8840. I thought it was interesting that Alan Colmes, of all people, and I've argued with Alan on television. Actually, he's a really nice guy. He's wrong on a bunch of stuff, but he's a really nice guy. But I found it stunning that one of the senior mouthpieces in talk media for our industry didn't, from the left, doesn't believe that Hillary will be the nominee. Which means if she doesn't end up running, you're going to have Joe Biden's going to run for sure. Nothing's going to stop Joe Biden. He'll get 2% of the vote, and he'll run again the next time. He just can't help himself. Joe Biden has to run for president. If he's not running for president, then there's something wrong with him. But he's going to run for president, and nobody's going to vote for him, and he won't be the nominee. So if Hillary isn't running, if she decides not to run, I think it's a very odd election process that may go on in 2016. But I wanted to share with you that story because I found it intriguing that Alan Colmes said to the talk industry, and, we talk about it like it's some big, huge, you put everybody that's into, syndication radio in one building in New York, it's about maybe 400 people on a good day. But still, to make that kind of observation to those people that were watching, he silenced the room. It was really incredible. So having said all of that, Hillary's not had a good book tour. So she's making headlines. But when we get back, I want to get into the news of the day, something that took place last night on Capitol Hill. You probably already heard some about it, but we'll get into that. Plus, the other thing that's really on my mind today. Kevin McCullough, glad you're with us. It's AFA Today on AFR Talk. Stay with us.
attention.